afternoon, sisters and brothers. I know we've heard a lot of good and interesting information today. I can't wait until we get to the discussion portions. We can hear more from you and why you guys came out today and the questions that you may have. We've talked a lot about revolution, about the crimes of capitalism, and what we're really discussing is the fundamental problems of the social and economic order of capitalism. But we're also discussing socialism, which we in the PSL believe is the only alternative to the capitalist economic system. Now it's interesting because from the time all of us were young kids in our school or listening to the mass media, it's been pounded into our heads that socialism is something bad. They say it's a utopian dream in theory, but in reality it's a totalitarian nightmare. In fact, anti-communism or anti-socialism is so widely promoted within the capitalist system that it's reached the level of a kind of unofficial religion in the US. In other words, it's an article of faith that capitalism is good and that the alternative to capitalism, socialism, is bad. Not just bad, perhaps demonic or devilish. This propaganda is extremely important for the ruling class of the US bankers, the corporations, the billionaires, and the Pentagon war contractors, because they know that while people may get angry, and indeed we know they are angry, over staggering levels of unemployment, they're angry about the endless war, when people get angry over increasing rates of poverty, when they get angry about a system that builds prisons and prioritizes funding for prisons over education, when they get angry about the worst features of capitalism, they will be in a state of complete cluelessness about any possible alternative to the existing system. And if people don't know there is an alternative, if they are convinced by the propaganda machine of the contemporary ruling class, just as feudal serfs were convinced 500 years ago by the propaganda machine of kings and queens of medieval Europe that it's the only possible system, then it creates in the minds of the oppressed a certain passivity. Absent an alternative, people are reduced to finding solace in either individual recreation, diversionary activity, or religion. Unable to solve the problems on Earth today, the ruling class tells us, well, at least, well, we can find happiness in the afterlife, right? It's extremely important that we discuss the viability of alternative right here and right now, because we know that the people of the US, like our counterparts in Egypt, Tunisia, and Greece, Spain, and Italy, are so sick and tired, are in fact rising up against a system that produces never-ending unemployment, low wages, poverty, violence, and brutality. Yesterday, thousands of nurses protested in Chicago, Illinois, in demonstrations coinciding with the NATO summit. Tens of thousands will demonstrate tomorrow and follow-up demonstrations in Chicago. You know, all last fall, as Mike talked about and other people have referenced, we saw the Occupy movement grow up in cities and public spaces all across the country. And in spite of the fact that the police, working in coordination with the federal government, evicted those encampments, and in so doing arrested more than 7,000 people nationwide, the Occupy movement and the aspirations that are represented are bound to come back to full life. We know that in Greece, the people just voted out of office the ruling class parties that imposed such huge austerity measures on the Greek people so as to be able to pay German and French bankers extortionate interest rates. We know that this election followed the uprising of the Greek people, and similar movements are developing in Spain, Italy, and France. In short, sisters and brothers, we know that we are on the verge, or in fact in the first stages, of a massive global movement of resistance against capitalism. That's why we're having this conference and conferences like this all over the country, and that's why we're building this party, this socialist organization. The propaganda against socialism by capitalists may have partially worked over the decades because the ruling class, the capitalists, could always make the argument that while they were becoming ever richer and income inequality between the rich and the poor was becoming ever greater, at least the lives of working families, of working class people in the US were manageable. In spite of the inequality, many working class people could say with some confidence to their children, it may be hard now, but I know this system will allow you to have a better life than my generation or my parents' generation before that. That was the element that gave the capitalist, anti-communist propaganda some degree of traction. But it is our assessment and our analysis that this phenomenon is turning into its opposite. That capitalism today is not offering young people and young adults a better life than their parents, but can only promise a lifetime of increasing hardships, misery, poverty, and oppression. And this, we believe, shows and proves why capitalist, anti-communist, and anti-socialist propaganda will be overcome by a new mass socialist people's movement, a movement led by young people against capitalism. Let's look at some of the facts and some of the status of young people under capitalism today. All our lives, many of us young people are told that we need to go to college to have a future. Experts agree that a college education is absolutely vital in this increasingly competitive jobs market. But college opportunities are only becoming scarcer. I'm studying education, so I get to work in public high schools in LA throughout the week. And you know, last week I was working with students who are feeling pressure that I couldn't even have imagined 10 years ago when I graduated. These young people are juggling multiple AP classes, magnet classes, extracurriculars, and in addition to the pressures of their everyday lives. They're preparing their college applications. They want to go to schools like USC and UCLA. Well, did you know that UCLA had around 97,000 applicants last year, and the average high school GPA for their incoming freshmen is a 4.3? How is a student who doesn't go to a school that even offers AP classes supposed to compete? Or a student who has to work part-time or take care of a family member instead of pursuing enrichment activities? In other words, how are working class students supposed to get into these schools these days? The short answer is they're not. More and more we are seeing access to a college education become a privilege that is only afforded to some. $750 million in state funding was cut from both the SC and the UC systems in California this year. Public colleges are supposed to be largely funded by our tax dollars. The point of public colleges is to make education more accessible to working class and middle class students. But all across the country, the elected officials are opting to cut the state's budgets for these schools. So then the schools point to that and they raise their tuitions. And this throws the burden of paying for this increasingly expensive education back onto the students and their families. Lacking funds, schools are also cutting classes. Every year, more and more students are eligible for college, and this is a good thing. California has had record numbers of students graduating from high school in the past few years. That's great. But the cash-strapped university system under capitalism cannot find a place for all of these young people. This year, the California State University system did something drastic and mind-boggling. They froze admissions completely. They did not accept any new students in the spring, and they waitlisted everyone for the fall. What kind of school system can't afford to accept students? And where are these students supposed to go? Many of them will not be able to go to college at all, but more and more students are turning to the community college system, and that's not such a bad thing in and of itself. The community colleges have a proud tradition of providing educational opportunities for students who would otherwise have none. But that's coming to an end as well. The community colleges all over the country, and in California in particular, are overloaded with the increased demand on their system and the cutbacks to their budgets, and we see so many students can no longer afford or denied admission to four-year schools. I know that a lot of people in this room have experienced this firsthand. Classes are being cut and it's getting harder and harder to get the classes you need. So the trend is that while the incomes for working people in this country have more or less stagnated over the past 20 years, tuitions and fees have shot up exponentially. The tuition for California state schools has risen more than 316% in the last 10 years. So how are working people and their families supposed to make up the difference? Well, one way is by taking on huge amounts of debt. Student debt has been in the news a lot lately. The aggregate student loan debt in the United States is at more than $1 trillion. $1 trillion in total debt for people who just want to go to school. For many, the debt we've taken on to pay for college becomes a life sentence. You know, there was an article in the Huffington Post recently about a senior citizen whose Social Security check is being garnished to pay off the student loan debt she'd accrued decades before. The situation is out of control. But we're supposed to view student debt as an investment, right? We're investing in college degrees because that will make us money later. That'll help us get jobs. But what happens when there are no jobs? A Rutgers University study recently showed that less than half of all the graduates of the class of 2009 managed to find jobs for the first year after graduating. 43% of graduates who are employed in fields that do not require a college degree, doing things like waiting tables, retail, all of those jobs that we work to make ends meet. The latest numbers show that 3 out of 5 recent college graduates are unemployed or underemployed, and unemployment for young people across the board is the highest since the government began recording those numbers in the 1940s. It's clear that these days, capitalism, especially for young working class people, is a system that promises nothing. So that brings me back to what we mean by socialism, and talking about socialism again. Again, socialism has been so demonized that people don't really know what it means. To us, to the PSL, socialism means that the banks, the big industrial enterprises, transportation, such as the trains and trucking companies, the mines, and the centers of property owned by the capitalist class, that property should be made into public property. And the wealth derived from the businesses, and by the way, those profits are derived not from the work of the capitalists, but from the work that we do, the work that the working class does, that wealth should be used to provide, as a legal constitutional right, every person when they come of age the right to a job. The fundamental right to employment at a decent, livable wage. Socialism prioritizes the right to a job for everyone. Secondly, it means the nationalization of the banks, because the bankers' wealth is ill-begotten, it's criminal, it's based on fraud and organized institutional greed. The assets of those seized banks should be used to benefit the people. That means, as a first measure, the immediate cancellation of all student loan debt. Education must be, and will be under socialism, a guaranteed legal constitutional right, and not just a privilege for those who can pay the banks these extortionate loans. In other words, socialism means a system of free education up to and through higher education. It means an end to all interest payments to the banks and an end to all foreclosures. Housing, too, is a guaranteed legal right. A socialist system means that healthcare would no longer be a commodity, so that health insurance companies who are just bankers in disguise can make a profit. We all get sick. We all will get sick. We all require medical care at some point. That's a function of human life. And so instead of allowing greedy, crooked capitalists to make profit from our illness, socialism says that healthcare must be universal, available to all, and completely free. There's nothing utopian about socialism. It's completely realizable. Capitalist apologists say that socialism is impossible, that their social order is God-given, it's permanent, and that the rule of the billionaires is the crowning achievement of human progress. But sisters and brothers, that was the same assertion made by the slave owners before the destruction of the slave system. They too said that it was natural, that it was God-given, that it was the highest achievement at that stage of capitalism and humanity, and look what happened to them. I'm quite sure that Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI thought that a system of absolute monarchy was the divine, God-given natural order of things prior to the French Revolution, and probably right up the stairs on their way to the guillotine. Every old decaying social order, every old decaying empire asserts until it's swept off the stage of history that is the most perfect of all social systems. But when a social system is decaying from within, when it's addicted to war and militarism abroad and it's pauperizing its own people at home, it becomes just a matter of time before it's vanquished by an internal revolutionary change and upheaval. This is the new phase that we are entering. We are building an organization made up mainly of young people who have the vision, the commitment, and the dedication to follow this historical path through to its conclusion. A new world is possible, and we believe a new world is inevitable. And we hope that each and every one of you takes a step today to join us, and in the coming days, to join in the PSL and working with us in all these new mass movements so as to create a society that is reorganized to meet human needs. We want to save the environment from capitalist production and to create a society where people are guaranteed the basic things needed to sustain life, so that all of us can grow, so that our children can grow, and the environment of security and human cooperation. In other words, sisters and brothers, join us and help us build socialism.